Hello everyone. Welcome to Anime Dreams. I am delighted to have you join us on this journey. Today, we will explore an intriguing fanfiction topic: what if Naruko sacrifices herself? Disclaimer: the content on this channel is for entertainment and discussion purposes only. I do not own any of the anime footage used in my videos. All rights and credits go to their respective creators and copyright holders. Let's begin. The gentle wind swept over a sprawling, verdant field, rustling the grass and the leaves in the trees. Nightfall had cloaked the sky, and the moon cast its soft, soothing light. Under the vast expanse of stars lay a quartet of ninja. 3 were fast asleep, while the 4th maintained a vigilant watch. The vigilant ninja, Naruko Uzumaki, stared into the glowing embers of a makeshift fireplace, remnants of a once bright fire. Naruko, a determined young genin, sought to prove her worth to the world. She was petite with distinctive whisker-like birthmarks on her face. Her long, blonde hair cascaded down her back, stopping just short of her hips, and her crystal blue eyes shone in the darkness. These eyes radiated warmth as she observed her sleeping team members, whom she considered her family. Her gaze first fell upon the largest figure, her sensei Kakashi Hatake, known for his gravity-defying hair and his A-rank ninja status. Kakashi was someone she trusted implicitly, a mentor who helped her become a better ninja while providing steadfast support. She didn't mind his eccentricities, such as his chronic lateness and his habit of reading inappropriate novels in front of their 12-year-old team. He was a wonderful sensei, and she wouldn't trade him for anything. Next, Naruko looked at another sleeping ninja, Sakura Haruno, a spirited girl with pink hair and a fierce temper. Despite Sakura's frequent scolding and occasional physical reprimands, Naruko valued her as her first true female friend. This friendship meant a great deal to Naruko, who had learned through her challenging childhood that having friends was one of life's greatest joys. Finally, Naruko's eyes rested on Sasuke Uchiha. A small smile played on her lips as she thought of him. Initially, she had perceived him as a brooding, self-absorbed loner, driven solely by a desire for power, even if it meant abandoning his teammates. Her perspective shifted after their first mission together when Sasuke protected her by taking multiple near-fatal hits from senbon needles. This act of selflessness spurred her to understand him better. Following the Chunin exams and the recent attack on the Leaf Village, Naruko discovered that Sasuke had been cursed by Orochimaru, the nefarious snake Sannin. Despite the formidable power the curse mark bestowed, Sasuke chose to resist its influence, a decision that earned Naruko's profound respect. Now, here they were, gathered as a family and camping after completing a mission some distance from their home village. Naruko's duty was to keep watch for a few hours before waking Sakura for her shift, but she had no intention of doing so. Growing up, Naruko had always been a quiet, solitary child, fearful and longing for companionship. However, due to harboring the Kyuubi, the powerful beast that had attacked her village 12 years prior, she was shunned by both adults and children. While the children were unaware of her secret, the adults had warned them that she was someone to avoid. This ostracization only made Naruko cherish those close to her even more, willing to sacrifice her well-being to spare them any hardship, even something as minor as a night watch. Yes, Naruko resolved, she would not wake Sakura or any of her team. They needed their rest, and she would not disrupt it, no matter how tired she became. Idiot, a whisper pierced the night's silence. Naruko turned toward the source of the voice, slightly surprised that someone from her team was awake. It was Sasuke. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and glared at her. "Why haven't you woken Sakura? It was her shift nearly an hour ago," he whispered, irritation evident in his tone. Feigning innocence, Naruko scratched the back of her head. "Ah, is it that time already? I must have forgotten," she murmured. With a sigh, Sasuke stood and walked over to the tree Naruko was leaning against, then sat down beside her. He clasped his hands together, deep in thought. "It's almost daylight. I can handle a couple more hours," she said quietly. Sasuke's dark eyes observed her, trying to decipher what was going on with his teammate. "You should sleep. We don't need you slowing us down tomorrow." "Okay, I'll wake Naruko started, but Sasuke grabbed her arm, stopping her mid-sentence. Don't. It'd be a bother to wake her up. I'll take the watch, he said. Naruko nodded and rested her head against the tree, closing her eyes. She wouldn't admit it to Sasuke, but she was extremely tired. She suspected he knew, given her lack of resistance. Then, a thought occurred to her. This might be one of the rare moments she could talk to Sasuke privately, something she had always wanted to do but never found the time for. Sasuke, we're friends, right? She asked, keeping her eyes closed. Go to sleep, was his quiet response. Silence enveloped the night, and Naruko felt a pang of disappointment. Then, she heard a soft, yes. Her eyes opened slightly, and she tilted her head towards Sasuke, who was right beside her. She smiled, happiness evident in her gaze, until she noticed the curse mark on his shoulder, encircled by another seal. If I asked you something personal, would you answer? Naruko whispered. Depends. Does it hurt? Your curse mark? She asked, her voice barely audible. Sasuke shifted his gaze to Naruko, who immediately looked down, avoiding eye contact after asking such a sensitive question. Not really. It used to hurt before Kakashi-sensei added the second seal. Now, it just feels like a heavy burden, Sasuke replied, surprised at how open he was being. He realized Naruko genuinely wanted to understand him better. I understand the feeling, Naruko murmured to herself, hoping Sasuke hadn't overheard her. Lost in thoughts of how relatable Sasuke's situation was, she inadvertently voiced her thoughts. Sasuke narrowed his eyes at his teammate, displeased by her reaction to his description of the curse mark. How could she possibly comprehend what it felt like? Was she merely trying to console him? He did not need her sympathy. HN. Don't say things you don't mean to make me feel better. I don't need that, he whispered harshly. Naruko was taken aback by his words, feeling a sting of hurt. She sensed his anger in every whispered word and wanted to assure him that she wasn't fabricating her feelings. I do understand. She whispered, torn between revealing a long-kept secret to her teammate and continuing to guard it as she had most of her life. How? Sasuke growled. Naruko winced at his tone, clearly indicating his agitation. She decided to lift the bottom of her shirt, just enough to reveal her flat stomach. Sasuke looked away, blushing at what he initially thought she was doing. A blue glow drew his attention back to Naruko as he saw her holding her shirt just below her chest, exposing a glowing blue seal encircling her navel. What? Sasuke asked, slightly stunned. Naruko lowered her shirt as the seal faded, blending back into her tan skin. I, too, have a seal on me. It contains something malevolent, and I just needed to confide in someone. Anyone, Naruko whispered. I didn't know, Sasuke said, surprised by her trust in him. What is contained within the seal? Sasuke inquired. Naruko looked away from him, her gaze settling on the glowing embers in the fire pit. I can't say. Maybe in the future, she whispered, her voice tinged with sadness. The two remained silent for a long time, unsure of what to say next. Finally, Sasuke broke the silence. You know, you and I, we're different from others our age. You never had parents, and I lost mine. We both carry significant burdens. We should look out for each other more often, he whispered, hoping Naruko had fallen asleep. However, he heard a contented sigh from the girl beside him. I would like that a lot, she said quietly, her cheeks warming at Sasuke's words. Happiness filled her as she leaned on his shoulder, closing her eyes. Oi! Get off! That doesn't mean you can sleep on me. Sasuke whispered harshly. His only response was Naruko's soft breathing as she had already fallen asleep. Oi! This was her family. Naruko, watch out! The blonde-haired girl heard Sakura scream. Crystal blue eyes widened as they looked upward, seeing her sensei in front of the beaming sun, spiraling downwards toward her with his fist raised. She smirked and leapt to the side, causing her mentor's fist to slam into the ground. Dirt-covered smoke clouded the training ground, blurring Naruto's and Sakura's vision. A blue-glove fist suddenly burst through the smoke, aimed for Naruko's stomach. She grit her teeth and placed her hands in an X formation to try and block the attack. However, that wasn't necessary as her collar had been yanked backward. She whirled her head around, seeing her other teammate Sasuke pull her back and away from harm. The Uchiha smirked and flashed his eyes upward. Naruko nodded, getting the signal, and Sasuke intertwined his fingers, placing them downwards. Naruko put her foot in Sasuke's hands and he launched her into the air. Kakashi, following his fist, flew out of dust, expecting to find his blonde student, instead finding his black-haired student. Sasuke launched out a kick, causing Kakashi to block with his forearm. The silver-haired ninja then used his free hand to grip the ankle of Sasuke's extended leg. Sasuke twisted his body and placed his hands on the ground and launching out another leg to kick the older ninja. Kakashi, once again caught the leg, and soon realized that Sasuke was attacking the same way he did in the bell exam. Choosing to avoid the situation, Kakashi launched himself backwards, his ankle however, caught something. He turned his head to the side, and his eyes widened as he saw Sakura smirking while holding a taut ninja wire connected to a tree on the opposite side of the field. The silver-haired ninja's back hit the ground with a thud, then a strange shadow covered his head and he gazed at the sky. Naruko, followed by 4 copies of herself, were falling through the air, of course grinning wildly. These Genin? Kakashi thought as the 5 Narukos slammed into his body, causing a dust explosion. When the smoke cleared, the figure that was once Kakashi, was now a wooden log. The 3 Genin's eyes widened as their sensei had managed to avoid their collaborating attack. They grouped up in the center, trying to spot their sly sensei, only for him to appear in a poof of smoke. His one eye was closed, somehow revealing that he was smiling, and he clapped. "You 3 did an excellent job, too bad I'm just a little too good." He chuckled. The 3 let out a defeated sigh before looking back up at their sensei with determination. "Let's try again." Sakura yelled out first. "Yeah. This time we'll win." Naruko agreed. "HN." Sasuke smirked. All 3 of the Genin began to fall into a battle-ready stance. Kakashi chuckled before placing his hands up. "Ma. Let's call it a day, shall we? I was thinking we should have a team dinner. You know, bonding." Kakashi smiled. The 3 Genin were suddenly grinning all together, before Naruko sprinted off towards her favorite ramen stand. The other 3 ninjas sighed and followed the girl, knowing it was pointless to argue against her. "Does she ever not eat ramen, sensei?" Sakura chuckled. "Doesn't seem like it." Kakashi replied. Sasuke remained silent as they made their way after the blonde girl. Later into the night, the streets of Konoha had settled down, civilians had headed into their warm homes, ninja had returned to their sleeping quarters to prepare for upcoming missions the next day, and Anbu patrol units had begun to watch over the village. Of course, Team 7 was still sitting in a warmly lit ramen stand, happily conversing with each other, and the respected ramen cooks, who had allowed them to stay much longer than they should have. "I swear one more mission with us chasing that demon cat and I'm gonna get Kiba and his clan to hunt her down," Sakura exclaimed, wildly throwing her hands in the air. Naruko, Sasuke, and Kakashi all nodded and laughed. "Oh!" Sakura jumped out of her seat, looking at the clock on the wall. "My parents are gonna kill me. I didn't realize it was so late. Bye guys." Sakura waved before sprinting off into the dark night. "Thanks for dinner, Kakashi-sensei." The other ninja waved goodbye before Kakashi too stood up, making his way out of the ramen stand. "Well, I should head out too. I promised Guy that he and I would race around Konoha. Have to get up bright and early." He waved at Naruko and Sasuke before stepping out. The 2 genin looked at each other, confused as Kakashi-sensei had rarely ever agreed to some of Guy's wild challenges. Eventually both of them shrugged their shoulders before getting out of their seats. "Goodbye, Ayame-chan. Old man. Thanks for letting us stay." Naruko yelled behind her. Sasuke turned to face the cooks and nodded slightly, giving them his thanks. Come back anytime. The two cooks replied back. Out and in the streets, Naruko took a deep, cool breath of air before turning to her teammate. Well, I guess I'm gonna go home too, she said. Sasuke scratched at the back of his head, before mumbling something that Naruko didn't quite pick up. What was that, Sasuke? She asked, leaning closer to the boy with her face turned so her ear was closer to him. Sasuke glanced towards the ground, a blush spreading across his face. Luckily the streets were dark enough that his blonde teammate couldn't see it. I said, let me walk you home. His voice barely a whisper, however Naruko heard, and she too couldn't stop a slight blush from appearing on her face. Not trusting herself to speak properly, she instead opted to nod her head slightly before turning to face the direction of her house and began to walk that way. Sasuke quickly hurried and walked beside her. The two walked in silence, not really knowing what to say. Well, Naruko didn't know what to say. Sasuke on the other hand was just trying to focus on keeping his steps steady and not look like he was having trouble walking next to his teammate. Honestly, why was he so nervous? Arriving at a beat-up, rusty old apartment, Sasuke had to refrain from covering his nose and mouth, due to the intense smell of rotting garbage. The two walked up rusty metal stairs and through a hallway with blinking, half-lit light bulbs. Then Sasuke saw Naruko stop in front of an old wooden door which seemed to be made of rotting wood. The blonde genin slammed her shoulder into the door, while turning the knob, trying to unjam her horrible door. When the door finally gave in, she stumbled forwards into her apartment. Steadying herself, she turned around to thank Sasuke for walking her home, since that had been the first time someone had offered to do that in her entire life. Thank you, Sasuke. I'll see you tomorrow at the training grounds, she said in a whisper, so that she wouldn't wake any neighbors beside her apartment. Sasuke, however, wasn't focused on what she was saying. He was focused on the inside of her apartment, looking past Naruko. There was barely any furniture, and what furniture was there was broken or stained. Her wooden floors looked crooked and dangerous if someone wasn't wearing shoes. Idiot, Sasuke said, before charging past Naruko and into her apartment. Hey, what do you think you're doing? Naruko said, placing her hands on her hips, clearly annoyed with the sudden intrusion. Sasuke looked back at the girl with a hidden warmth in his eyes, something Naruko couldn't notice. Get some pairs of clothes, you're staying with me, he all but commanded. Naruko's eyes widened at the forcefulness of Sasuke's tone, but saw that the young teen was very serious. She thought about kicking him out and telling the boy that she didn't need help with her living situation, but even she had to admit that she lived in a disgusting, horrible apartment. She really couldn't call this place home. Just nodding her head, Sasuke was surprised as the blonde walked into what he assumed was her room before coming back out a couple minutes later with a small sack thrown over her shoulders. Good, come on, Sasuke said, extending his hand to his teammate. Naruko blushed slightly before placing her hand on Sasuke's. Without realizing, Sasuke gripped her hand and walked out of the apartment and towards the Uchiha compound. Naruko gazed amazingly at the enormous stone gate, bearing the Uchiha's clan symbol. She had never seen what the Uchiha compound had looked like. Her expectations were blown out of the water as she saw many exquisitely beautiful wooden homes. She frowned, realizing the only thing that was missing was life in the homes. She glanced towards Sasuke, looking up at his face, which seemed to be staring impassively at the road in front of them. The Uchiha compound seemed beautiful, but Naruko knew that it must have been much more beautiful when there had been people living within the compound. Sasuke must really miss everyone. It was then that Naruko realized that Sasuke had truly lost more than she ever did. Sure, she never knew what love was like, or what childhood friends felt like, but Sasuke had, and he lost it all. Sasuke caught Naruko looking at him and parted his mouth, thinking of something to say. How come you're looking at me? He asked. Naruko glanced down to the ground, her cheeks felt warm as she was trying to decide whether she should tell Sasuke that she had been thinking about what he lost. Finding some form of confidence in herself, Naruko looked back up towards the expecting eyes of the Uchiha. I was just thinking, I got your back, she said as her eyes closed and her mouth formed a wide excited smile. Sasuke didn't really understand what she meant, but found himself smiling anyway. They arrived at his particular home and walked up the concrete steps. "Here we are, I'll show you to the guest room," Sasuke said. Naruko nodded excitedly, as she could already tell that there was something more special about Sasuke's house than any of the other homes that she had seen. He opened the door and led her inside. Neither noticed their hands were still intertwined. The next day, Sasuke rolled over in his bed, his black hair disheveled from the long hours of deep sleep that he had gotten the night before. It felt good knowing that he wasn't living in his giant home, alone. He sat up slowly, and began to rub his eyes so that he could get adjusted to the light that was shining brightly in his room. Looking at the clock, he saw that he and Naruko still had a couple of hours before they were supposed to go train with Sakura and Kakashi. He wondered if Naruko was still asleep. Was she a deep sleeper? His thoughts came to a sudden halt when he smelled something dangerously foreign in his house. He sniffed the air again before bolting out of his bed and swinging open his door. He smelled smoke. Sprinting across the wooden floor, he threw open the door that led to the guest room, hoping to find Naruko. However, all he saw was a sleeping mat on the ground, with her sack of clothes next to them. The bed in the room remained completely untouched. This was weird, Sasuke concluded. He turned around and ran towards the kitchen, and there he saw it. Naruko pacing all around the kitchen, an apron covering her pajamas as she stirred a large bowl of batter. He ran to one of the pans that had been the source of the smoke and saw that she was trying to make pancakes, but hadn't flipped the one on the pan. "What are you doing?" he yelled as he forced the spatula under the burnt pancake before removing it from the pan altogether. Naruko stopped her determined and messy process of mixing the batter, and turned towards her teammate. Naruko smiled widely at Sasuke. "Oh, you're up, I was making us breakfast." She grinned. Sasuke stood there completely shocked, noticing her apron was covered in flour and egg, even her cheek had some batter on it. This girl was making a complete mess in his home. "Do you even know how to make pancakes?" Sasuke asked. Naruko put her finger to her chin in thought. "No, I don't think so, but I remember that Gigi had told me how to once and I figured it couldn't be that hard." Sasuke sighed before washing a rag and cleaning the batter-covered counters, and then proceeded to push Naruko out of the kitchen and to a table. "You really are an idiot," he said as he forced her to sit at the large wooden table. Naruko frowned as she sat down. "I was just trying to help. And I don't like you calling me that." Sasuke smiled softly at the girl in front of him before moving back into the kitchen. "I'll make breakfast, okay?" Naruko sat in stunned silence as she could hear Sasuke mixing the batter in the kitchen and pouring the batter onto the pan that she had been using. Sasuke was determined now to fix a much better breakfast than the blonde-haired girl had before. At least she got all the ingredients right. His thought process was stopped as he heard a light pop before looking at his toaster. There, he saw slabs of thin meat sticking out of the toaster. The top halves that hadn't been in the toaster at all were still raw, while the bottom halves were burnt to a crisp. He felt a vein pop on his forehead. "Did you put bacon in the toaster?" Naruko took a bite of a lightly browned pancake that had been topped with butter and dipped in a light brown syrup. Her face beamed as she chewed on the soft piece of food and let out a little sound. Sasuke sat on the other side of the table, calmly eating his pancakes, while trying not to chuckle at the strange event that had happened just half an hour ago. Naruko living in his house had sure livened up the place, and it made him realize how lonely his house had been before. "Ah, Sasuke, this is so good. Bio," Naruko said. Sasuke simply nodded his head before placing another bite into his own mouth. He wondered what exactly he should talk about with Naruko. He felt as if he should know her likes and dislikes, but when he thought about it, he would have a hard time coming up with answers for those. Of course she liked ramen, but surely that wasn't the only thing she liked. If so, she was the biggest idiot he had ever met. Then another question popped into his head: why hadn't she slept in the guest bed? "Naruko?" The blonde's head snapped upward, eagerly meeting Sasuke's eyes with her own. "Why didn't you sleep in the guest bed?" Sasuke asked. Perhaps this would give him a better insight as to how Naruko worked. Naruko began to rub the back of her head, and chuckled sheepishly. Ah well, I thought the floor was more comfortable, she said. Then Sasuke caught it, something about Naruko that he didn't know before. He realized that Naruko was a horrible liar. She always scratched the back of her head and chuckled. He also noticed her eyes would avoid him and rather gaze at the ground. You're lying, the black-haired Uchiha stated. Naruko's eyes flashed upwards connecting with his own, and a small glare marring her face. Nuh-uh, I really like the ground more, she said. Sasuke quickly got up out of his chair and walked over to where Naruko was sitting, his tall form shadowing her own as he glared down at the blonde in front of him. He didn't like Naruko lying, and he especially didn't like her refusing to tell the truth. Tell me why you didn't sleep on the guest bed, he stated again, more seriously than the first time. It's not even that big of a deal, Naruko mumbled. Naruko, Sasuke said, raising his tone, as if he were talking to a child, which in some ways, Naruko probably was. Said blonde was shifting uncomfortably in her seat, wishing to be somewhere else rather than sitting under the intense gaze of the Uchiha. It was uncomfortable, someone caring about what she did. She couldn't remember a time when someone was questioning her so hard about telling the truth. I didn't deserve it, she mumbled. Sasuke's eyes hardened when he heard her meek reply. What do you mean? He asked, more suspicious about his teammate than ever before. That bed belonged to one of your clan members. It would be insulting to sleep somewhere that your family had slept. I don't deserve to sleep there, Naruko said, her voice trailing off towards the end, but Sasuke had heard it all. The young Uchiha had learned one more thing about Naruko, something he would have to fix. Naruko clearly thought very little of herself, almost as if she had hardly any worth at all. If she felt unworthy to sleep in a place that someone from the Uchiha clan had, Sasuke would have to make her see that she didn't need to think so low about herself. Edie, Sasuke was about to say, but caught himself as he realized calling her an idiot probably didn't help her self-worth. Naru, that room you slept in was a guest room. I don't think anyone has ever slept there. Besides, even if someone had, I'm sure neither they, nor I would ever mind. Naruko raised her eyes to look back at the young boy in wonder, before nodding her head and standing up. Thank you, Sasuke. She smiled, then in an awkward fashion, the girl gently wrapped her arms around Sasuke in what he assumed to be a weak, yet very grateful hug. In fact, Sasuke found himself enjoying her gentle embrace and he too wrapped his arms around her. Now, let's go meet Kakashi-sensei and Sakura, Sasuke said as two Jonin separated. Naruko nodded and raced off towards her bedroom to change out of her blue pajamas and into her ninja gear. Sasuke smiled and walked, in a slower fashion, towards his room. He would have to continue to pay close attention to Naruko. He learned that she was very caring about others, but lacked in caring about herself. He would just have to watch over her and make sure she never felt weak or undeserving. After all, he told her that he would look after her, and she needed it. What's so good about Sasuke? Naruko grumbled as she kicked a rock across a dirt path. When Sasuke, Sakura, and she had appeared to the training grounds, Kakashi had said that starting today he would train us individually, beginning with Sasuke. In Kakashi's words, this would give us time to break away from our teamwork and improve our individual skills. But still, Naruko didn't like the feeling of separating her team, her family. It didn't seem right after they had been doing so well together. Naruko? A pink-haired girl ran up behind her excitedly. Ah, Sakura, what did you want? Naruko asked as she turned towards her teammate. The pink-haired girl leaned over, putting her hands on her knees, breathing heavily as she had been looking for Naruko for a long time. Catching her breath, Sakura straightened upward. Well, I was wondering, since we have the day off and we aren't the best of friends, would you like to go shopping with me? Sakura asked. Naruko slightly recoiled at the thought of shopping but thought over what the pink girl had said. They really weren't as close as they should be for a team, and what better way than to spend time together on their way off? I guess I'll come, but I'm not really a fan of shopping, Naruko said sheepishly. That's okay, you just haven't experienced shopping the way I have. Naruko gulped as she was suddenly being dragged by Sakura into the village shopping districts. Naruko fell onto her sleeping mat, completely exhausted. Who knew shopping could be so tiring? Shop after shop, Sakura had dragged Naruko to every clothing store in the village trying on different outfits that she wouldn't wear that often anyway. Of course, Naruko just watched. She felt no reason to tie on such fluffy, soft, glitter-filled outfits when she would never use such things in her line of work. A slam of a wooden door caught her attention, however her body was completely shut down, so she sleepily gazed at the door of her room. Hearing light footsteps in the wooden hallway, Naruko knew that Sasuke had returned from his training session with Kakashi-sensei. His footsteps grew closer to her door, and she gazed upward at the young black-haired Uchiha as he opened her room door. He looked like he had been through hell. She noticed multiple wounds, most likely from kunai or shuriken, and his outfit seemed to have torn in multiple places. "Have you been here all day?" Sasuke casually asked, as if he didn't realize how messy he looked. Naruko sat upwards, blinking owlishly before shaking her head. "Sakura had wanted to spend time with me. She took me shopping." Naruko shivered in disgust at the end of her sentence. "Have you eaten?" he asked. Naruko was about to say that she wasn't hungry, however, her stomach had to make a slight rumbling sound, giving her away instantly. Her cheeks reddened at such an action. Curse her stupid stomach. Sasuke extended his hand to the young blonde girl. "Let's go, I have nothing in the house so we'll have to go somewhere to eat." She gripped his hand and flung herself forward, out the door, suddenly finding a hidden energy within herself. The idea of having ramen was consuming her thoughts. As if knowing what she was thinking, Sasuke yelled out behind her. "No ramen." Naruko froze, a horrified look on her face. What did he mean, no ramen? What else could she possibly eat? Sasuke gripped her hand as he passed her frozen body, leading her outside of his home and into the streets of Konoha. Sasuke noticed that her face was still stuck in a fearful expression and he sighed in irritation. "Would you quit that? Ramen isn't the only food in Konoha. You'll try something different tonight," he told her sternly. Naruko snapped out of her expression before grinning and scratching the back of her head. "Ah, sorry Sasuke, I'm not used to anything other than ramen," she said. Sasuke's eyes narrowed as Naruko did her awkward routine of scratching the back of her head and chuckling. Was there more to her addiction to ramen than he thought? Did she have an allergy or something? The two Junon continued to walk into the village, with Naruko being surprisingly quiet for not being able to get her way, but Sasuke couldn't figure out why. Anyhow, he decided that he would go to the barbecue steakhouse that seemed to be very popular amongst young ninja teens and civilians. When they arrived, her really knew something was up as Naruko stopped walking beside him and walked more behind him. What was up with her? Was she nervous? It wasn't like this was a date or anything. Sasuke mentally froze. Did she think it was a date? Deciding to not ask her about it, he walked towards the host. "Table for two," he said plainly. The host nodded. "Why, certainly, if you would just follow him." The host stopped talking when he noticed the blonde girl, hidden behind the Uchiha. "Actually, I'm sorry but we are full for the night." Sasuke's eyes widened as the host suddenly changed his tune. Sasuke even saw open tables within the restaurant. "What about those tables?" he asked, clearly annoyed. "I'm terribly sorry but those are all reserved." The host bowed his head at the young boy, but silently glared at the girl behind him. Naruko's head drooped as she wanted to look away from such menacing eyes. The girl lightly tugged at Sasuke's shirt. "Sasuke, let's just go," she whispered. Sasuke nodded in a huff and turned around, walking away quickly while Naruko followed behind him. Sasuke's patience had been tested multiple times that night. Every restaurant that he had been to had either been suddenly booked, closed, or full. Never in his life had he been unable to find a restaurant in the middle of the week like tonight. He eventually gave up and got 2 strawberry crepes for himself and Naruko, while they sat on a hill overlooking the park. The sun had begun to set over the horizon, emitting a dull orange glow around the village. Even though not finding a suitable restaurant had been annoying, Sasuke felt suddenly calm. The silence would have been relaxing if he had been by himself, but he knew he wasn't alone. Naruko sat right next to him, being completely silent, and not even touching her crepe, despite her stomach growling every couple of minutes. What was up with her? Oi! Aren't you hungry? Do you not like crepes? Sasuke said, snapping Naruko from her musings. Naruko's eyes widened at his question and mentally scolded herself. She wasn't appreciating the food that Sasuke had bought for her. How rude of her. Naruko took a larger than normal bite out of her crepe, which caused some cream to stick to the corners of her mouth. No, it's really good, Sasuke, thank you, she said quickly, as if she had done something wrong. Sasuke frowned. Naruko had been acting weird ever since she had been told that they weren't going for ramen. Is that all she could eat? Then something came across Sasuke's mind, causing him to freeze. Was that all she could eat, because that's the only thing she could buy? He thought back to the glares that he thought had been directed at himself when asking to eat at a restaurant, but he suddenly remembered that the glares had been sent to Naruko, who was right behind him. Did this have anything to do with that seal she showed me on Outlast mission? Sasuke thought. Naruko, those restaurants. Sasuke started, but found himself unable to form the words to finish. He saw her nod her head, understanding what he meant. Her light blue eyes swiveled to look directly at his own black eyes. There, Sasuke could see all her pain and sadness. Naruko's eyes were watering, ready to spill tears at a moment's notice, and her lip had been quivering. At that moment, Sasuke's disdain for the village reached its zenith. The way they treated the young blonde girl struck him as profoundly unjust, even malevolent. He now recognized that, despite Naruko's outward appearance of a cheerful, energetic, and seemingly carefree orphan, she was, in reality, a deeply insecure and lonely child. No wonder she seeks approval so desperately, Sasuke mused. Her seal, her burden, has likely deprived her of simple pleasures like dining out and forming meaningful relationships. Without uttering a word, Sasuke suddenly enveloped her in a firm, supportive embrace. Naruko's tear-filled eyes widened in surprise as she found herself in his arms. She interpreted this gesture as his way of showing understanding and solidarity. She fervently wished for this to be true. They remained in that embrace for an extended period, the crepes they held growing soggy, though neither was concerned with such trivialities at the moment. Naruko tilted her head to gaze up at Sasuke, his typically cold black eyes now radiating warmth as they met her blue ones. Sasuke was captivated by her cheeks were flushed, her large blue eyes gazed up at him with tear-streaked cheeks and slightly disheveled hair. He also noticed the cream from her crepe clinging to the corner of her mouth. Unable to restrain himself, Sasuke leaned in slowly, his thoughts reflecting, if anyone deserves affection, it's her. He felt his lips hover just an inch from hers. Naruko, paralyzed by the moment, kept her lips slightly parted as her heart raced. Suddenly, she felt the gentle touch of his lips against hers. Her eyes closed as she experienced her first genuine kiss, a moment that reassured her that at least one person cared for her. When they finally parted, Sasuke smirked, and Naruko felt her face flush under his gaze. Her eyes widened in surprise as she felt something warm brush her lips. Her blush intensified as she realized Sasuke had licked the cream from her face. Don't do that," she whispered, embarrassed. Sasuke's smirk persisted as he drew her closer. He resolved to keep a vigilant eye on Naruko. After all, she was now an important part of his life. Dear YouTube family, Part 1 concludes here. Please subscribe to my channel, Anime Dreams, for more captivating content.